Hola mi gente, Sean with Spanish 55 here, and I've got a question for you. What is the difference between these four statements? ¿Qué onda, wey? ¿Qué tal, macho? ¿Cómo está, weón? Parce, ¿cómo vas? Okay, how about these four? ¿Qué padre? ¿Qué guay? ¿Qué bacán? ¿Qué chévere? Well, it's a trick question. The correct answer is none. I'm basically saying the same thing in four different accents or dialects of Spanish. In the first phrase, I'm sort of saying, how are you, man? Or what's up, dude? In four different dialects. In the second phrase, I'm sort of saying, that's cool, in those same four different dialects, which are Mexico, Spain, Chile, and Colombia. And this is just one example of how Spanish phrases can differ greatly from country to country. And you should probably expect that, since Spanish is the second most highly spoken native language in the world, with over 483 million or something like that native speakers, and it's spoken in over 20 countries. So how do you, my oh so eager to learn Spanish rookie, decide which one of these accents that you should choose from? Well, I can help you with that. I've been around the block a little bit, so to speak. I've been to 3 different Spanish-speaking countries, and I've met people from basically all Spanish-speaking countries over the last 8 or 9 years. So, bienvenidos al video. Vamos a empezar. Now, one point I want to make before we start. This video assumes that you want to be able to communicate with as wide of a variety of Spanish speakers as possible. Obviously, if you know you're going to a specific certain country and are going to spend an extended amount of time there, well, then you should probably learn how to speak that country's specific dialect or local accent or slang. But for purposes of this video, we assume that you want to be able to speak Spanish with as wide a variety of native speakers as possible. So which accent should you choose? Well, let's go through the countries a little bit. I'm going to mention specifically the ones that I gave in those examples and kind of run through all the countries and talk about why I think they may or may not be a good choice for you. So let's start with Mexico. Now, if you're like me and you live in the US, it's not a bad idea to learn Mexican Spanish because Mexican Spanish is the most commonly spoken form of Spanish here. However, there are some times that Mexican Spanish is not perfectly grammatically correct and they use a lot of Americanized borrowed words, and a lot of other Spanish speakers do this too. But in terms of proper formal Spanish, sometimes it's not the best. And Central American Spanish is pretty similar to Mexican Spanish in the sense that they use a lot of Americanized words as well. I'm talking about places like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and if you get down to Costa Rica, they have their entire own different Spanish. It's a little bit different, but the point is that none of these countries are speaking that proper or formal of Spanish. They all kind of got their own slang. It's not necessarily hard to understand. It's easy to understand, at least for me, Mexican Spanish, Central American Spanish, but it's just not that proper of Spanish sometimes. How about Spain? Spanish from Spain. I mean, you would think, right, that that's where the language came from. It's probably best to learn it from there. Well, the thing about Spanish from Spain is that a lot of Latin American Spanish speakers get kind of confused with the vosotros form of the verb and several other things that Spanish speakers from Spain do differently from Spanish speakers in Latin America. And since the overwhelming majority of Spanish speakers nowadays live in Latin America, it's probably best for you to learn Spanish that's easily understood in Latin America. So how about Chile? No, I can barely even say that with a straight face. Chile, I've got some friends from Chile. I spent a little bit of time in Chile. It's a great country. I really recommend visiting it, but the Spanish from Chile is horrible. It's almost impossible to understand. Let me give you an example. ¿Cómo está, weón? Mira, te cuento que ayer eché carrete con mi nueva polola y vimos al gallo con quien pololeaba antes, ¿cachai? Muy pocos están cachando todo esto. So unless you're going to Chile and you really need to learn Chilean slang, don't learn Chilean Spanish. And while we're deep down there in South America, Argentina, Uruguay, they say the Y or Y sound almost like a sh, yo me llamo Sean. And to a lot of Spanish speakers, it just kind of sounds weird. So I don't recommend that as the most neutral, best form of Spanish. And I would actually kind of say the same thing I said about Chilean Spanish to Cuban and Dominican Spanish. Now, I love Cubans and Dominicans. I think they're very friendly people. I've met a lot of them. Sometimes I do not understand what the heck they're saying. They just ramble about anything and it's so hard to understand. So what about Colombia? I mentioned Colombia, right? Colombia, they have a very formal culture from what I've seen. I spent a little bit of time in Colombia and know a lot of Colombians. They have a very formal culture and sometimes they speak a little bit more properly than in other countries, a little bit more, seems like it's a little bit more manners, if you will. However, they also, like all the other countries, they have some slang that would just look weird to people from outside of Colombia. In Venezuela, which is right next to Colombia, they also speak pretty good, fairly neutral Spanish in my opinion, but like the Dominicans and the Cubans and Puerto Ricans, probably not to as much of an extent as the Cubans and the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans, the Venezuelans cut off the S and they leave off a lot of consonant sounds on the end of words, so sometimes it can be kind of hard to understand, especially when they're talking fast in my opinion, so I can't really recommend Venezuelan Spanish either. All of these countries are going to have some slang words that just don't make that much sense in other countries. So what you, my amigo or amiga, need to do is learn neutral Latin American Spanish. That's the best way that you're going to be able to communicate with as many Spanish speakers around the world as possible. You need to listen and practice your Spanish with an educated native speaker from a Latin American country. And that's what you're going to get with Spanish 55. All of Spanish 55's tutors are native speakers from Latin American countries, and you're going to learn that neutral Spanish that you need. Y bueno, mi gente, eso es todo por el video de hoy. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Hasta el próximo video. Drop a comment down below if you feel like there's anything that I missed, if I left out any countries. Hit that thumbs up down below if you liked the video, and be sure to subscribe.